Hi, everyone. Good morning. We're going to go ahead and get started. A few folks are going to continue to pop in. Welcome to the first session in our three-part Achieving Fundraising Effectiveness in a Virtual World workshop series. I know many of you, but for those I don't know, my name is Vanessa Bernier. I'm the Program Officer for Jewish Life here at Rose Community Foundation. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Rose Community Foundation remains wholly committed to supporting local Jewish nonprofits and the local Jewish ecosystem as we aim to mitigate the pandemic's organizational impact and plot a path to recovery. We hope that in partnership with Andrea, this three-part series will be useful to you all as you consider new programs, techniques, and strategies to reimagine your fundraising efforts and navigate evolving realities. The second and third session in this are happening next Thursday and the following, the 12th and the 19th, the same time. If you didn't get a chance to sign up, please feel free to reach out to me and we'll make sure that we can get you in. Those sessions are focused on motivating loyal donors to become inspired donors and on creating virtual experiences, compelling philanthropic investment. If you have questions about those workshops or about the Foundation's broader grant-making strategy for our Jewish community, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'll drop my email in the chat so you all have it. And here to guide us through each of these workshops is Andrea Wasserman, the president of AWB Partners and an expert in resource development. She has a really impressive track record, so I am not going to read you her CV, but she has catalyzed change, reimagined, revamped, and galvanized leaders to drive organizational transformation. And I can't think of anyone better to help us evaluate and understand today's fundraising landscape and explore new strategies for our current world. So before I turn it over to her, I just want to let you all know that we have this set up as a meeting versus a webinar to maximize collaboration. Really excited to see all your faces on here. Please feel free to utilize the chat. We've got folks from the foundation monitoring it and will be responding. And at the end, just keep an eye out for a slide with some office hours that you can connect with Andrea, and we will follow up with the deck from today's presentation. So with all that, I'm going to turn it over to Andrea Wasserman. Thank you for being here. We're so excited to have you.
Great, great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me in. It's so nice to see you all. I think I could see you all on one screen, which is wonderful. It creates more intimacy, I hope. Normally, if we were in person, I would love to be at the the door to the room and greet you all and meet you. But we can't do that. But some of you very graciously and generously shared a bit of yourselves with me through the questionnaire that was sent out. So I just want to, just sort of share with you what I heard in terms of who is making up this audience over here, this group, this cohort, and what's on your minds, okay? So let's see. I heard from you that some of you are having some challenges just keeping yourselves motivated, inspired, let alone going out and motivating and inspiring our donors. This is a big thing, right? So we have to take a look at our well-being and how we're fueling up and fortifying ourselves so we could get out there and do great work. There are quandaries regarding deepening, enhancing donor relationships in a time where physical distancing is recommended, and that sort of mechanism, the in-person, is taken away from us. How do we connect in authentic ways in these days? How do we deepen relationships? How do we begin new relationships and grow our donor prospect pipelines? How do we engage board members and other colleagues and other lay leadership to engage in our fundraising work in these times? And many, if not most, of you communicated to me, how do we cogently communicate our mission, inspire people in these times to engage with us and also compel people to give? Some of you also mentioned, how do we plan? How do we organize our fundraising programs? And then the one that kept coming up over and over and over is, how do I make the ask? Okay, like what's the secret to that? And some of you even went so far to say, how do I make the big ask? Okay, so we're looking for big quantum leap gifts. So I would say that there is a lot on your individual and your collective minds, and I honor that. I recognize it, I hear it, and boy, are we in wild times right now. So the only thing to do with that is to zoom out, and let's start at the beginning. We're going to zoom out and we're going to begin with mindset. And we're going to begin with human need, our need for inspiration, before we could even get to the inspiration that we need to bring to our organizations and to our constituents in these times in order to compel deeper relationships and greater giving. So in preparing for this session, and actually in a lot of the work that I'm doing with clients and students, I really like this quote that I pulled from the CEO of Lincoln Center in New York City, where he talks about in these times the concrete is wet right now. We've never seen anything like this before, correct? Yes. And his prediction is that in 3 years' time, when we look back, some organizations will look back and they'll be able to say, you know something, during those really weird, unusual, crazy, crazy times in, 2020 and, we're going to get into 2021 now, those times really represented a moment in time where my organization and I just needed to pause. I hibernated. I didn't engage. There was just so much going on. And that would be fine. There's no judgment over that. In other cases, there are individuals within organizations, there are teams, there are lay leadership, there are boards that are saying, you know something, fertile ground. Like, let's throw the cards up in the air and let's see what's going to stick. And they are using this period of time to reframe and to really say, how can we do things a bit differently? And I want you to consider that. Again, there's no pressure over here and there's no real right answer, but I do, in the spirit of this 3-part series, I'd like for you to go through it and open up your mind, if it's not open, to the possibility that some of the work that we do, especially as it relates to fundraising practice, actually the times call for reimagination and rethinking how we're doing certain things in order to beta test, to try new things, to deepen existing strategies that are working, but we could go deeper, and to eliminate things that aren't working. So I encourage you to really consider that as a possibility, and I encourage you to take this kind of framework, not just for yourself, but how do you bring that question to your work with your colleagues? And equally important, many of you talked about, like, in these times, how do I inspire people? These kind of animating questions actually bring us closer in relationship with our stakeholders, with our prospects, with our major donors. Okay, so that's where I want us to start. We move now to the gathering with purpose. And I would say that in person, when we're gathering, when we have a meeting, when we have an event, when we're doing anything, really, really important to check in and make sure we're clear on what we're doing. In the virtual arena, where we're all kind of sort of searching for, like, what is the secret sauce to meaningful engagement in this virtual arena, I believe that we have to really intensify our efforts to begin with purpose and really be clear on what is it that we're doing together and what would we like the outcome to be. And to design that in relation to the audience that we're trying to reach. So what might resonate with the audience? So in designing this session, I'm thinking about you, and I'm thinking about what might be on the minds, on your minds, what's front and center for you. And there's a duality to our purpose for this series. On the one hand, we want to deepen our connection to our stakeholders. We know that relationships are our business. And the duality is, it's not just relationship for the sake of relationship, it's relationship to compel giving. We're fundraising. We're talking about fundraising over here. So the two of these go hand in hand. So we're doing our relationship development with greater intentionality around compelling giving. And so for this first part of our 3-part series, in pursuit of robust fundraising, I want to start us off with talking about the care of the self and the care of each other, which we often neglect, and we cannot neglect that because we will not be good out there if we neglect that. I want to then go into, let's just zoom out and let's try to understand the understandable right now, the confusing world that we're in. What do we know about the philanthropic environment that could help inform where we focus our time and our energy? I want to then take a look at, okay, let's just press a pause button for a moment and recommit and reconnect with who our target donor audience is or are, and what are their proclivities, what are their interests, and how might I deepen those relationships based on not what my organization needs from these people, but what do these people need from me and from my organization right now? And then the fourth area that I hope we'll get to today, or we'll at least briefly, broad stroke get to, what are some of the essential practices that are showing, that are yielding the greatest fundraising results in these times? So before we jump into the substance of this meeting, I also want to point out two things that I hold as truths right now. Many of you are asking, how do I do this work in these times? How do I, what's the secret to the technology? What's the secret to the virtual world? And I want to bring us back to the fundamental of our work, which is really about human need, human desire, human yearning for deep connectedness to one another and to purpose and meaning. And that is the business that we're in the Jewish communal enterprise. And that is our superpower as being part of this Jewish communal enterprise. And that is in the center of our wheel. Excuse me, let me just go to the next. I'm sorry about that. The technological platform, right? The way in which we harness this virtual community is the conduit through which we do this deep relationship work. And so we need to figure out, how do you harness it? How do you use it? But the technology, I just want to make sure we're all clear on this. The virtual world is not the strategy. So I'm going to be taking us to the essentials, which truly the essentials really matter now more than ever. And the question is, how do we use our compromised circumstances, maybe, or maybe it's fertile ground for doing things differently, you choose, but how do we use our circumstances in order to do that relationship work even better and even more? And I do want to point out that I am actually kind of very obsessed with this concept that, given that we're in a virtual environment and given that your box is on a screen, even though you're welcomed into my home over here, I want you to resist the urge, to the extent that you can, of being a spectator in this conversation over here. And I really do, encourage the deepest level of application of what we're talking about to your particulars in your organization, so you become a practitioner in this. And through chat, that's how we'll connect and we'll communicate. I created a resource book for you, a workbook, where you can jot, and you'll see on the slides corresponding pages to your resource book where you could write notes and you could think about things, and then I give recommendations for further deepening your knowledge. And then also we'll be offering those office hours. And I really do want you to avail yourselves of the office hours where I can customize some of this work specifically to your needs. So my quick public service announcement: I would not be Andrea Wasserman if I did not bring this and start with the care of the self, because that is really, truly the most important thing to do at least once a day. And I want to really focus on this practice of philanthropy that we're all involved in, and how glorious it is, and how we're so fortunate that this is what we are doing and this is what we can do. And the external nature of philanthropy in terms of promoting the welfare, the well-being of others, usually through generous donations to good causes, doing good work. All of this has an external focus to it. I've been grappling of late to really think about, how do you work with the people involved in philanthropy to consider philanthropy not just externally, but also inwardly. Inwardly towards yourself, in the care of yourself, as well as how do you bring that kind of culture, that ethos, that practice to your respective organizations, and really practicing an internal culture of philanthropy to ensure that you have a healthy organization and that people in the organization feel that they're thriving so they can be fortified to go out and do the great work that you're doing. And so with that said, I would love in the chat box if there are any examples that you and your organization have been doing in order to really fortify, to reinforce this sort of practice, this ethos of well-being amongst yourselves so you all can get out and do that work. And it might not even be something that you're doing right now, but it might be something that through this, it's really sparking some interest in possibly bringing some of those practices. And I'll just say that there is one client that I was working with and I was so delighted. And again, this is like a really big, big quantum leapy kind of thing. But they did, like they were singing together on Zoom. Like there was a song that they all sort, and they did this whole sort of mix, and it just brought joy. They laughed, and it was great. And how great to start your day with something like that. How great to start your day with a walk and talk via phone with a colleague. So those are the kinds of things I would love to see. Again, practitioner, engage, jump in, share with us what are some of the things that are going on that are really fostering stronger culture of inward-facing philanthropy. And we'll be looking at the chat box as you post those. Okay, so let's zoom out a bit and let's take a look at one of the big questions that has come up over and over and over. And this was from February 2020, March 2020. I was getting questions from everybody. Wait, there's a pandemic that's going on right now. How can I possibly ask anybody for money? And this is 9 months in and people are still like, is this the right time to ask people for money? How can I engage in fundraising in these times? And, I'll say that I even saw in your, your pre-class surveys, some of you are asking the question about the timing. How could you ask, there's resistance out there. There's so much chaos out there. How can we be fundraising in these times? And I made this slide in March of 2020 with the heading to ask or not to ask, and I left it at that. And I now sort of add, it's not the right question, right? We should be asking, right? We should be asking about the well-being of all of our stakeholders and then not concluding for them whether or not it's the right time to ask or not. Because if we take a look at a 40-year trajectory, because honestly nobody really knows what the right answer is to this, and it's not black and white, it's not a one size fits all. But if you look at this trajectory of 40 years of the philanthropic sector going through highs and lows of this unknown, this kind of crazy, exciting, interesting, mind-blowing world that we live in, the philanthropic sector has never fallen off the proverbial philanthropic cliff. So again, I go back to the right question is to ask how our major donors and stakeholders are doing. And from that point of inquiry and from that point of listening, figuring out, wait, is this somebody that actually I can engage in conversation around greater investment in the organization? And perhaps to turn it around a bit and say, there are so many people right now that are eager and seeking and yearning for greater connectivity and greater purpose. And why wouldn't I take this opportunity to try to ask the right question in order to figure out, are there ways that I and my organization can help this person find greater purpose through investment in what we're doing right now? So I don't want to be tone deaf, because there are plenty of people that it's not the right time to engage in the philanthropic conversation. But I do actually want to take a moment, and I do want to hear from some of you. Over the past 9 months, have things happened that signaled some positive sparks for you in terms of your fundraising practice? Has anything happened that has brought you closer to donors, or that you would say, something that was a win? That's something that I really want to fuel and I really want to develop a bit further. And you could either raise your hand, you could use the chat, but I'm going to stop for a moment and pause. And are there any wins, any successes, even if they're really small? I'd love to hear.
So I'm happy to talk. Hi, my name is Sarah Levy. I founded a school that started this year. And
Wow.
something that we found is that because we're a school that's been in person, our parent body is just so grateful for what we're doing that they've probably been more philanthropic than they would have normally, just because we are offering a service that they need. So they're happy to pay our costs and then offer whatever they can to keep us going.
Beautiful, beautiful. So it's sort of like that gratitude that inspires then greater giving. And in the most authentic way, how do you optimize that? And this becomes also just for everybody sort of in our little classroom now, like how might that apply to what you're doing? If it does, not everything's going to be applicable, but thank you so much, Sarah, for jumping in and sharing that with us. Are there any other examples, just silver linings, things that we could actually say, something went right today. Something actually went right today. Anybody else? Anybody close any gifts? Anybody get any increases?
Hi, I'm Julia Regger from
Hi,
Wednesday.
Julia. So nice to see you.
I think one thing that we found is that we used to really feel like we had to wait to ask for meetings, not necessarily solicitation meetings, but even stewardship meetings when our fundraising staff were on the ground in particular cities. So we're a national organization with a very robust hub in Colorado. So we felt like we had to wait for meetings with our Colorado donors and prospects until we were in town, because that was really, the way you did business was when you're in town, we're going to sit down and meet in person. And I actually think that the fact that everything is virtual has opened up the ability to have more check-in conversations with people more frequently, because no one's going anywhere. So people will take meetings in a way that they wouldn't previously. And I also put in the chat, we've also had some success with some relatively short Zoom gatherings, really just to inform supporters about what we're doing differently and how we're supporting, how their gifts are helping us support our constituents at this time, and bringing in participants, which again, some of those things were logistically challenging when it was all in person. So there have been some great opportunities with this shift to virtual.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, again, these are just, and I hear these examples over and over right now, that sort of the physical distancing doesn't mean that we are emotionally distant or we're socially distant, right? And that in many ways, people have more availability right now. So where it might have been harder to sort of, jump into somebody's busy, externally, facing life, where people are kind of they're more stationary, and you have greater opportunity to really jump in and engage with people. That to me signals fertile ground and opportunity. And then the other thing is the lower barrier for entry in our programs. And we'll talk a bit more about that if you are, which you should be, I hope, okay, no shoulds, but this one you should actually, organizing interesting sessions that are life enhancing, that are fascinating, that tie back to your core work, your core mission, and offering that for donors and prospects. And then overlaying an analysis on that. Who's showing up to our party over here? And what do we know about them? And can I use that as an opportunity to welcome them into my home and have a conversation with them? So I think that all of those are really, really nice, fertile ground examples. And at the same time, again, I am not here to be tone deaf and Pollyanna-ish. I put on good colors when I do these sessions. I put on, like my lipstick, and I know, right? It's hard for everybody. There's a subtext to everything that's going on right now for all of us. And, what I wanted to do was, sort of in preparation for the session, check back into sort of the philanthropic arena. I'm eyes and ears. I'm always investigating. I'm always talking to people. But like, what is Chronicle of Philanthropy? And if you're not reading Chronicle, I highly recommend that becomes part of your practice to deepen, your knowledge, your understanding of the environment we're working in. And, just at the end of October, right? Like, we see over here, again, go back to that graph, like when somebody's going to graph this period of time, we're going to see an uptick in philanthropy in 2020. There's been a surge. There's been a surge, not across the board, it's been episodically, but there has been a surge. But many of us, most of us who are in the front lines of this are kind of sitting and biting our nails a little bit, right? To be like, well, what's to come? What does the future hold for us? And it's worthwhile to dwell in that space for a little bit of time, not to get stuck over there. The question is how are we continuing to nurture and fortify ourselves and really build up our arsenal so we could get through the next sprint of what's to come. So, okay, with that, let's jump into this, donors, okay? My sort of key with donor work is and I don't think that any of you do, but if you are approaching donor work and donor relationship work as donor as the person who's going to sort of be like that ATM machine to fuel our deficit or to fund our bottom line, and donor is not being considered in all of his or her splendor with a whole set of needs, wants, desires, and again, go back to like we're coded for connectivity and purpose and whatnot. The question really is as an organization, how donor-centric are you? And how well do you actually know your donors? And so in preparation last night, I prepare for these things up to the last minute. It's such a great opportunity to learn. You know, I came across, it's from 2016, which, you know, I wish it was a little bit more, closer to the times, but not so far away. This study that is a donor loyalty study, and here's the link, and I encourage you to take a look at it. It's pithy, it's not a hard read, from the non-profit Times, really did an analysis of how organizations sort of think about their donors and how donors think about themselves. And I pulled a couple of key points, and as I go through this list, again, this is not for spectator sport, this is for practitioner. Think about either like a subset of your donors and really begin to think about how well do I actually know them? And how well do my expectations and my needs as a representative of an organization align with what they might be thinking and hoping and wanting from their engagement, their interaction with us. Because if we could figure that out, then the virtual challenge that we have or the physical distancing challenge that we have becomes less daunting, right? Because we're in relationship with a real human being, with a real person. So the whole, it's all about me. A lot of times it really is. I mean, the donor wants to do great things in the world, right? But they want to engage with organizations that are the conduit through which their highest hopes and dreams are going to happen. And so how are we relating to them on that level? Inspiring, impact oriented, not we have to fund the budget this year. It's more on a impact and what changes are we making in the world together in partnership. The concern that donors, only are, sort of narrowly minded and only giving to one organization, right? Like somebody who's philanthropically oriented and has the capacity to do so generally spreads the wealth, right? So we could sort of debunk some of the competition out there. People who are philanthropically oriented, when we're in relationship with them, they have a lot of love to give, we hope. And so we should just be mindful of that. Volunteering and events are gateway drugs. Like, we're going to pivot in a moment or two and look at, the communal study that was recently done through Brandeis. And, your community comes out with high scores on a volunteerism, a spirit of volunteerism. The question that I would pose to you right now when you're thinking about deepening donor engagement, I know that we can't do all the things that we normally do in person, but what are some ways that you can spark interest and deepen interest through hands-on, through a food drive or some collection drive, through writing notes to people who are in need, through gathering and sharing feelings, thoughts, ideas, dreams, hopes? All that should be part of your equation right now when you're thinking about deepening connection and connecting people in a more hands-on way to furthering the objectives of your organization. And then I just want to briefly touch upon content, which we're going to go deep in our next session in terms of our case for giving and how we're messaging, how we're asking for money. But I want you to start looking at and being mindful of how you're communicating, how often, how frequently, how pithy you are, how visual you are, how colorful you are in terms of your communication, to really understand that that is very important, your presentation of your organization, and then how you are instilling deep trust that the work that you're doing, that your care of the money that's being invested through your organization is going to where the donor wants it to go and is needed most. Okay, so in terms of the study, the Denver Boulder Jewish Community Study, just by show of hands, well, actually, I don't even need to out anybody over here, but I do want to say that if you haven't taken a look at this study, I put up a cheat sheet for you over here, so there should be no excuse, because this kind of study is such a gift, right? And so oftentimes these studies are done and then they sit on a shelf and they're not used. This kind of study should be a fundraiser's secret weapon, right? Or overt weapon, in terms of if you're asking yourself the question, that if you have the curiosity about who is, you know, Jewish Denver Boulder philanthropic community, who comprises it, what are the proclivities, what are the interests, what motivates, what inspires. So I do want you as homework to really just take a look at these different areas. And again, the cheat sheet is totally fine, pages 28 through 36. And you know, the big question is not just to read it again as spectator, but what points that are jumping off the page might be useful for you in terms of deepening your knowledge about your donors, right? And you know, donors, you know, are going to come in different forms, right? In terms of the characterization of what is a donor, who is a donor, donors as individual donors, donors as major donors, right? And I want you actually to be sort of thinking, how am I categorizing, okay, my donor audience? Individual donors who become major donors, and you'll see the logic behind this afterwards. Do I have corporate donors, right? Do I have institutional donors, you know, like a foundation? Do I have donors who are part of donor advised funds? That's another category, right? So once we start to sort of think about the characterization of our donors and what their proclivities are, what their interests are, who are they, we could then get into deeper and better development strategy, because we're linking our strategies and tactics to what inspires and motivates that group of people to go further. Okay, so just a point of question right now for those of you who have engaged with the study and those of you that learned from the study. I'm just going to pose the question, no pressure, but does anybody have anything to offer that kind of jumped off the page in terms of the study that actually helps them to think about their donor strategies in a fortified way?
I can share again.
Great.
So this is actually something that we thought about for recruitment. We haven't thought about in terms of donor, but I think that it could apply. One of the things that I picked up from the study was that it talked about how there was a segment of the population that was reluctant to be involved in the Jewish community because they found it to be too exclusive and not like inclusive of different things. And so our school, while it's based on Jewish values and culture, anybody can come. And that's actually, some of our families came to us specifically because of that reason, because while they're Jewish, they don't like the exclusivity of some of the Jewish pieces. And I know that for some donors, they're not going to like that aspect. And we've already run into some donors that don't want to donate to a school that could possibly have non-Jews at our school. But I think that that might be an interesting way for us to approach specific donors, if they're anything like these people who don't want to participate because of some sort of exclusivity aspect, that maybe they would be more inclined to donate based off of that.
Beautiful. Sarah, thank you so much for sharing that. And, again, I just want to shine a spotlight on, that beautiful example, of the utilization of a tool, right, to deepen and fortify, this isn't just your fundraising strategy. This is this is your funding model also. This is your core mission. How are you using knowledge of your target audience, in a more strategic way in order to fortify your organization, right? It's all part of sort of institutional advancement. And I really appreciate, the way in which you synthesized and then you applied. And I would also say that, when we get to the question that all of you mentioned in your class survey, in these times, it's so challenging. How do I inspire donors? How do I deepen relationships? How do I engage board members? How do I engage colleagues? If we think about the opening that we started off with, is this a pause moment? Is this a moment to reframe? That's an animating question to bring to stakeholders, right? That deepens relationship. You could do that via Zoom. You could do that via a walk and talk. You could do that via an email. This is interesting. What do you think, stakeholder A, B, C, or D? This study is interesting also, right? This study or pieces of it are interesting and stimulating at a time where some people actually want to sink their teeth into and think about some animating questions about the vitality of the community, right? And so these are ways that you could really sharpen your both cultivation and your stewardship to the end of, right, deepening philanthropic investment, okay? So let's keep moving along. Let's go forward, not backwards, okay? Part 4. Okay, so we're heading into so little time and so much to cover, but this is our home stretch for right now, and we have a lot to cover in this section, and we'll do what we can. And then you're going to get a cheat sheet from me in terms of what are key sort of things that I think are important for you to think about. And then I want you to make a commitment, if you can, to come to office hours so we could go even deeper. Okay? Nods? Good? We're all there? Great. Okay. All right. So we're moving from episodic to strategic. And again, I don't want to assume that all of us on the call are episodic fundraisers or run episodic fundraising operations. But I do want to underscore that we could all get better at being more strategic in our fundraising. The inclination, especially in times of great need, is could somebody just give me the easy button? Can somebody just tell me, how can I just really close that gift? Or how can I bring money in? My organization, my institution has a need. And I'm just going to say, good luck. Good luck with that, right? That might be an episodic big win for the moment. But if you are not looking at your totality of your fundraising program strategically, you may end up falling off a little bit of a cliff at a certain point, right? Because if you do not have activity that's diversified, right, it is a vulnerability. It is a vulnerability. So how do we jump into a more strategic or deepening a strategic practice? I think that this is a good sort of dip your toe in the water, or it's go deeper into the water. And it really takes a look at fundraising on a continuum. And again, let's go back to the themes of who are our donors? How do we classify our donors? Not in an ugly way, in an authentic way, to the end of deepening their engagement and their investment. But then it has implications for how are we organizing our strategies and prioritizing our time in order to have the highest yield on our fundraising program. So if you look over here, I think of all of this as a continuum, right? There are definite people who are in our mix who will not become donors, they're constituents, but they should not be ignored in terms of the possibility of becoming donors. So I always start with, okay, if we're doing this in sort of a chronological order, which it very rarely works like this, but how are we pipelining people in and piquing interest in what we do, right? And the important thing for that is to do that with intentionality, not just that we're organizing for the sake of organizing and just having a nice afternoon. If the intention is the duality of the deepening connection plus the fundraising, compelling fundraising, it behooves us to know who's showing up to our party. And then with that, how are we then moving those people who might be inclined to support us, and sort of looking at that group. And again, I just arbitrarily filled in sort of giving segments. It's for you to take this model if it resonates for you and to fill in your own particulars, but your community-based donors, your broad-based efforts, right, become another segment of your efforts. And what are the interventions? What are the strategies? What are the broad base? And what I say is, what are we doing that is efficient over here? It's a direct response, you know, an e-solicitation, right? It's an event. It's something that I can do once and I'm giving it to many. And then we are in that domain, we're sourcing and we're trying to figure out who within that grouping actually has greater capacity and potential inclination, so we could move them along into a middle tier group. And I'll just say that when I looked at the report from Brandeis, I saw news on broad base and I saw news on major. And I just want to call the question of what's going on in your organizations in terms of your middle tier, and how are you nurturing and developing relationship with this middle tier audience, right? And then how are you getting to know who's who in your middle tier in order to then put into where we're becoming a lot more individualized, our major donor relationship programs, which are going to be a lot more of one-to-one and the personalization, and what do I need to do in order to help deepen the relationship with this individual, with this institution, in order to compel greater giving. So we are going to go into deeper detail on this sort of model, so you do not have to be really proficient in what we're talking about right now. But I do want, for homework, I want you to try on, if you don't already do it, segment. Try to do your donor listing in segments and start to look at what are the activities that I employ in order to deepen relationship and potentially move people along a giving continuum. Does anybody have this kind of practice that exists right now and have any insight to share with the group around it? Is it intriguing? Does it feel challenging? Does it feel right?
Andrea,
Yes.
could you please remind us what segmenting the donors are? You had given different kinds of ways of looking at donors. Could you please remind us what that is?
Sure. The different kind of donor types, I think, is what you're talking about.
Right.
Because then there could be segmentation according to interest. But in terms of the dominant donor types, and again, this list is not exhaustive, like there might be other, but these are the foundational ones. There's the individual that gives, and also in our next class, we'll go a little bit deeper into all of this. So thank you. This is how we could be customized and iterative. We have the individual donor, and within individual donor, you're going to find individual donors that are going to come from, you know, your non-donor constituencies, right? You know, that are interested in you, but they might not be giving. And the lower end of it, I call sort of like the community donors, like the $1 to the $1,000, let's just say, donor. And what we're trying to do on that individual side is we're trying to move as many people who have greater capacity and inclination into higher levels so they become our major donors. And then major donors, we're going to talk about what constitutes a major donor program, because it's different. The treatment of the major donor is going to be different than what you're doing broad-based for your community donors, because you simply can't do customization for every single donor that you have, I don't think. Okay, so individual, then we have institutional donors, which would be the foundations, okay? Or it could be federation, that's an institutional donor, right? And that's generally where you're filling it, you're doing grant writing, and you're usually invited to come in, and then you're building relationship from there, grant, reporting, back and forth. That constitutes another whole segment. Corporate donors, right? Around events, around programs, activities, you go to the company, to the business. And the businesses actually could even be owned by some of your non-donor constituents or your donor constituents. So you may even have an opportunity when you're looking at your donors, you want to ask yourself, who's a business owner over here? Who maybe we could get a +1 gift because they represent individual, they might represent institutional, and they also have business, right? So that's another sort of segment, the corporate donor. And then a hugely growing area is the donor advised fund donors. And we'll go a little bit deeper into, into that arena at another point. But I think if you look at the individual, the broad-based, the major, the institutional, and the corporate, that's a really good place to anchor for now. Okay? Okay, good. All right, so moving right along, there are 4 key areas. I did some investigative work for us, along with sort of my client work and just my general sort of experience to see in these times, because again, we're overlaying that in these virtual times. And I promise you, we will get to how do you do this relationship development work more seamlessly in a virtual environment. But if you're not getting my message over here, what I'm saying is, essentials matter now more than ever. So it is way more important for you to sort of perfect and refine the fundamentals of your fundraising practice, and then figure out creatively, how am I going to harness the technology in order to do more of the essentials, okay? So the big ticket area for many organizations now is going to be in the inspire and engage your largest donors. So there is definitely the impetus and the desire to grow, more new, more donors, more this. In these times, I'm just saying, it's more likely that your growth in your fundraising is going to come from existing relationships with people who are currently your major donors, who already drunk the Kool-Aid. They love you, they get you, and they actually love the organizations and the people who love them the most. And I would just say that, not being tone deaf, again, you have to go back to what they're interested in, what their proclivities are, all of that. But being in relationship with your most major donors, if you have not prioritized that as of yet, jump into the game. And what does that mean, right? That means and Julia, you beautifully, pointed to, you're having briefings with your major donors. You're keeping them informed of how the organization is faring and the work of the organization is faring in these times. You're checking in on them to make sure that they're okay and that, what do they need, right? You're keeping them connected, warm, right? And in the early days of COVID, a lot of this work was done around the urgency of now. I would say that for some major donors and for some organizations, I'm seeing a bit of a pivot. It's still the urgency and the emergency of now, but we want to inspire also, and we want to inspire also. And I'm seeing that there's more conversations that are going on right now around revitalization and around future state. So if that can be woven in to the work that you're doing, I would say go for it. The other things that I would say that are working that you might consider if you have the right, donors, asking for flexible dollars right now is something that I would encourage you to do. And by flexible, I mean the unrestricted dollar. Oftentimes major donors want to earmark, want to, overly restrict. Right now, organizations need as much flexibility as possible. And so to have that kind of frank conversation, and we'll talk about how to have that conversation next week, that's a good thing. And that's bringing them into, in a very authentic way, what reality is and what the organization needs in order to thrive. So I would definitely consider that. And then the other piece to this that I just want to throw out, which actually catalyzes growth in all of the other giving levels on our continuum, matching gifts. There are donors who are able and willing to give you a larger gift, an increase in their gift, if they know that you're trying to work on getting increases from other donors. So a matching gift might be something that you might want to consider, okay?
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
How do you define a feedback loop? What does that mean?
Good, thank you. I sit with myself too much. That's how I define that loop. So feedback loop is really an authentic, again, we operate from a place of authenticity, but I, as a professional leader in the organization, or a leading lay leader or board, I'm grappling with something and I'm thinking about rolling this out, or I'm thinking about moving this in. And I know that, and let's just say it's something in marketing and communications, and one of our donors has an expertise in that. I may say, hey, you know, Judy, this is what I'm thinking about. Like, could you just give me your thought partnership? Could you just sort of weigh in? How might you improve this, right? Because oftentimes there's a hesitancy of that co-creation with a funder, with a donor, because, you know, it's a delicate line, right? Like, you're a professional team, right? And, you know, like, you want to have clear role definition, but donors of today, in many cases, are certain type of donor of today, right? Wants to really use their talent, you know, and really help to build capacity and build expertise in an organization. And if you have those knotty challenges that you really could use, don't do a BS, like let's do serious, but like if you really have that stuff, you have a really great donor stewardship opportunity that's authentic, that improves the organization. And then let's just say it's a new initiative that this donor gets really excited about. You actually have teed up a prospective ask, right? So, you know, let's just sort of zoom out right now. Is there applicability of what I just said right now in your respective organizations? And, you know, Jen, I see you nodding, right? Like, jot that down, because that becomes something to pursue in terms of building your development strategy right now. Okay?
Thank you.
Great, thank you. Great question. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so focus on donors who gave earlier in the year. Again, it gets back to finding new donors right now is not the easiest for many of our organizations. So I am just advising my clients, like, don't force it, because there's plenty to do that's underdeveloped, that's right in front of you, okay? And so the question is, are you running the lists of who has given to you thus far in the year? And under normal circumstances, you may be hesitant to ask for another gift. You may be hesitant to ask for recurring gifts, monthly gifts, right? But what happens as you're heading into sort of, you know, Colorado Gives on, you know, December 8th, 2020? Like, are you optimizing that? You're heading into year-end giving. This is like robust, amazing time, you know, for fundraising. And some people are doing really well in the stock market right now. You know, like, some people are really doing well. So I do want to encourage you to consider that this is an opportunity for you to really go back and ask people to give and give again. Okay, we'll go more into that in subsequent sessions. This is an area that I also want to remind you about, and I think Julia had said something earlier, or maybe another student in the class had said something, but we're all running, I hope, and if you're not, you must, running different compelling events, programs. People are showing up to our party, new faces. If you're running those programs and you're not overlaying greater intentionality around who is signing on, who's showing up, and trying to figure out, might that person be moved from a non-donor constituent into a community donor, or a non-donor constituent into a middle tier donor? Like, if you're not scanning through and screening through who's coming to your party, you're missing an opportunity. And the other thing I would say, which many of you have talked about, is how do we engage our board? How do we engage our lay leaders? How do we engage our colleagues in donor development, relationship development? Have you put those names on a list and asked people, do you know any of these people who are showing up right now? So now you're beginning to sort of create some sort of concentric circles around prospective donors. And now you've actually done some pipeline development work, right? In these times where pipeline development work is really, really hard to do, okay? Any questions around this? Like 100 questions, right? At any immediate, hundreds. Write all those questions and you could email me too. I'll answer all of them, right? Just not within like 50 minutes, okay? But we'll get to it, okay? Don't be shy. Don't be shy. Oh, and again, the volunteerism piece. I really want you to think about, like, I know the physical distancing is a real bummer, right? Around that. But are there things that you could do? Because your community actually likes volunteering, right? So what can you do? Once you pique the interest, then what's your follow-up? How are you connecting with that person and having a coffee date via Zoom, right? Okay. I'm just going to throw this in because you guys are so impressive with Life and Legacy, right? And don't be shy in this area. Many people, right? I don't know if you've gotten the memo. I'm sure that Life and Legacy has, has spread the word around this, but like, this is robust time for, spike and will creation and charitable bequests. So this is the time to really fortify, double down, and intensify efforts. Okay, mindful of our time, we're going to send you this deck. I hope that this was a good appetizer. That's all this intended to be. I have thrown a lot of information at you. All of it is supported, or most of it. I put some new things in last night. Most of it is supported in your resource book. I really encourage you to look at that. I put some further reading material in if you want to go deeper, and you can go deeper. And then in preparation for our next session, where we're going to focus very much on cogent case for giving, how do we inspire through our words, through our actions, through our presentations, I want you to go deeper into who that donor is and what inspires and motivates that donor to deepen relationship with you. COVID, no COVID. When you can answer these questions, you are on your way to fortifying your fundraising in a virtual world and beyond the virtual world. Okay, so we're gonna go back to this in our next session, but I love these questions, and these are great questions for you to talk to amongst like each other, with your colleagues, and certainly with trusted donors, okay, to figure out the answers to this, because this then will guide you in terms of what you're offering. Office hours, okay, you'll get this Monday, November 9th. This is your time, 11 a.m. to 12, okay? We could have an early lunch together. I could keep it structured, I could keep it loose. I'm gonna vibe off of you guys. I'm nimble enough, I could move with you. And then don't be shy, stay in touch, okay? I'm here. And here's just a nice parting message. I'll always part with a good message for the day, okay? Look into your hearts, discover new sense of possibility, believe in your gifts, right? And what are you renewing, right? What are you reframing right now? What are you committing to in terms of fortifying your fundraising and your development practice? Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrea, and thank you everybody for being with us here today. We really appreciate it. We know that there's a lot going on in your work. There's a lot going on in our country, literally minute by minute right now. So we really appreciate it. As Andrea mentioned, this is the first virtual workshop of 3. So we really hope you'll join us at this exact time, 9 to 10 a.m. next week, next Thursday, the 12th. And I really hope some of you will take Andrea up on that opportunity to join her office hours on Monday. That's a really great supplemental opportunity to build on some of this work. Yeah, Jen, did you have a question?
Yeah, I actually have a question for you and for everyone on the call, which is that it would be really, I would really enjoy knowing who is on the call besides myself. I know some people, but I certainly don't know everyone. And I wondered if we could maybe set up the half an hour before the next scheduled class just for introductions and for those people who want to do that. Would that be possible?
Yeah, I imagine so. We'd have to check with Andrea's availability, but maybe in the next email that we send out, we can sort of gauge interest in that, because I think that's a great idea. And the office hours are also a great opportunity for folks to share ideas and ask questions. But I do like that idea a lot.
I love it. And also, Jen, like, development, it's a total team sport. And especially now, like the collaborative models and the strategic partnerships and whatnot are really, if you can, it's the way to go right now, for sure. So I think it's great.
Great.
So the office hours are 9 to 11 or 11 to 1?
Your time. So what did I say? I said it's 11. Let me just see. Hold on one second. It's November 9th, 11 a.m. to noon on November 9th.
Okay.
Great. Well, thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your day. We'll